When we left off, you were talking about relating to the puppets, and you were talking about Elmo and Kevin Clash.
Yeah, yeah. Kevin is quite a talent, and the character of Elmo, it's kind of become like this little legendary story of how one day Richard Hunt, who had been the second puppeteer to try his hand at this this little red monster puppet that was kind of just an everything puppet at that point. Hadn't established any real personality, but Richard had kind of gotten fed up with trying to come up with something, and he just went into the Muppet room where they all hang out and just threw the puppet at Kevin and said, "Yeah, you take this thing and you try to do something with it." And Kevin just put it on and immediately went into, "What? Well, I don't know what's happening." And he went into this voice. And that's how Elmo was born. And
Could you see it right away?
Well, yeah, everyone could see that this was really a cute character, and it was really something. But no one ever imagined that Elmo would become like a superstar. It was like, because really the only Muppet character, the central character as it was devised, as the show was devised earlier, was this big yellow bird. Big Bird, who, because of his size and his visibility and Carol's wonderful sweetness of character and all that, was just a real favorite among the kids and everyone. And of course Elmo, not Elmo, but Grover, among people like myself, he was always my favorite. That's something about Grover that
Why?
Well, Grover also had a cuteness, but he was a little older, and also he had this indomitable spirit. I think that's what I've always liked most about Grover, is the fact that even though he never did anything really well, that never stopped him from trying. He always believed that he could do anything, and I love that quality, and especially in the really hilarious way that Frank personifies that through him. It's just hilarious. It's just a great character. And so Elmo was kind of like his little cousin. But Kevin with the voice, obviously the incongruity of this big guy whose real voice is similar to mine, and in terms of the tone, but to then to hear this voice coming out of this, and for us who can see, this big guy has got this little voice coming out of him, and then this little red character. It was just amazing. It was just amazing, and the more fun he had with it, the more he began to create this persona, this character who always speaks about himself in the third person. It's always, Elmo, love you. Not I, never I. It's always, Elmo don't know what to do today. I mean, it's like he never speaks about I or me. It's always Elmo. So it's just a wonderful creation that he came up with. He had also by then created a few other characters that were not quite as successful, but Hoots the Owl I always liked. This like old wise jazz saxophone player, Hoots the Owl, and we would always get like these really great jazz musicians who would come in and play for Hoots, so he could really play, and a few other characters that he did that were good, but Elmo just became this, and especially the year that the Tickle Me Elmo toy became the #1 toy in America. That he was a bona fide icon. He was, that was it. But the great thing about Kevin is that he didn't just get stuck with becoming an icon as Elmo. He really continued to let Elmo expand and to have more and more fun and to just do more things with the character. I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of stuff outside of the TV production with him. We do a lot of promotional appearances and events together. We're getting ready to do a Caribbean tour for the beaches, resorts, people, which will be a lot of fun. But Kevin's great to work with, and Elmo is a hit everywhere you go. I mean, there's no one who doesn't relate to him, especially among the kids. I mean, he's number one. Yeah.
So some of the other puppeteers, Jim Henson.
Jim Henson was obviously a visionary. He was a guy who from early in his career, even way before Sesame Street, in his early appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show, you could see that this was very different approach to puppetry that he was coming up with, and by the time he brought those creations to what Sesame Street had become, he had become probably, without peer, among puppet creators. He had established his own, vision and style of what puppetry was, and especially for television, because puppetry and its history, the history of puppetry, had very little to do with the medium of television. It had to do with the stage, proscenium, so marionettes, or there were hand puppets within a frame that but there was no need for the kinds of creations that Jim devised, which were really made for television. And then the variety of color and character and shape and he could make anything into a puppet.
Did you have a favorite of his?
Of Jim's, well, of course, Ernie is. I think even more so than Kermit. Everyone loves Kermit, but I find Ernie to be actually probably closer to Jim, in terms of his own persona, I think.
In what way?
Well, in his hidden persona, I should say, because Jim in real life was a very mild-mannered, very soft-spoken, almost bashful, I mean, you hardly ever heard him speak above, this one, tone of, volume. He was very soft-spoken, very thoughtful, but had this great sense of humor, and I think Ernie is the expression of that sense of humor more than Kermit or anyone. I think Ernie, the way he, for instance, is always cracking on Bert. I mean, he's always got some trick, something that, and I think deep down, Jim really had that mischievous quality. I think he had to, in order to be the kind of creative genius that he was. It had to be like this big joke, like, wow, look at what I can do, and that's kind of what he brought to the art of puppetry. Yeah.
And you had mentioned Carol Spinney before. How did your relationship evolve with Oscar the Grouch after that first screen test?
Oh, well, first of all, and I may have alluded to this, once you get to know the puppeteer, then you get a better sense of who the puppet is, or who the character is that they're playing, and to really appreciate those characters. But Carol, his two characters, pretty much exclusively, with just a rare, exception over the years with other miscellaneous characters, were Big Bird and Oscar, and they're so opposite. Big Bird, the big, innocent, the sweet-natured, everybody's friend, just the sweetest person you could imagine, and that's really who Carol is. Carol is this really nice guy, who everybody loves. But Oscar is, his vehicle for, saying and doing all the things that he never could do as Carol or Big Bird, and again, he's got that mischievous kind of, wisecracking. He's great at cracking on someone, and getting away with it, because if you're Oscar, you can say anything, right? Yeah, he's a lot of fun to be around. Once you realize that there's nothing mean-spirited about Oscar either. I mean, he's a grouch, but he's not. He doesn't do things that are mean. He does things for the enjoyment of being grouchy, because it's so much fun to be a grouch, So, in a way, he and Big Bird are similar in that sense, but he's everyone's favorite grouch, I guess. He's, yeah. And as I said, the puppeteers really do create who these characters become.
I mentioned something about Trash Gordon.
Then that's a new creation. That's something that we're just kind of getting a sense of. This current season that's running is the first season for Trash Gordon, who is an obvious takeoff on Flash Gordon, superhero kind of space guy, which in fact was the inspiration for the Star Wars movies, according to Steven Spielberg. Or not Spielberg, Lucas. He created that whole Star Wars idea based upon his early, remembrance of, Buster Crabbe and as Flash Gordon, this intergalactic hero. So Trash Gordon is kind of a takeoff on that, but in a way that relates to Oscar's imagination. Of course, anything having to do with trash, it has to be a favorite of Oscar's because that's one of his signatures. But we thought a little bit about whether Trash Gordon should be a grouch or was it, but he's really just a superhero who happens to, deal in trash, and he deals with other grouches, and he gets out of situations with grouchy villains, and of course he's always successful and heroic, There's not a whole lot of dimension there, but it's it's fun. We have a lot of fun with it. Yeah.
Talk about the character of Gordon himself.
Well, the thing I really find that is most appealing about Gordon, I was told initially by John Stone when I was being hired for the role that the qualities that they were looking for were those of a nurturing but also a very strong male presence. Someone who could be a model of the kind of fatherhood that I think modern society kind of looks for. The guy who's not afraid to be sensitive, and relate to children in a way that's really gentle, kind, considerate, patient, extremely patient guy, more so than I am actually. But he's someone who I think embodies a kind of real pillar of strength, I guess. People come to Gordon for help when they need it, because he's just always reliable, just and as an African American actor and a character, that really stands out, especially in the history of the images of black men on television. When I was growing up, of course, as I said earlier, the Amos and Andy show was a big favorite of ours, but there was never a character like Gordon on those shows. I guess the first actor to consistently have that type of persona was Bill Cosby on television in his earlier shows, as well as the Cosby Show, which all of those shows and earlier experiences led to that persona. But before him, there weren't black male characters in particular who had that kind of, someone who was, obviously intelligent and educated, but also funny and personable, and could hang with the kids, and and be just a regular dad, but also really be comfortable in his own kind of vulnerability, I guess, and some of my favorite things as Gordon, especially early on, were some of the songs that were written for me, because I do sing, and I love to sing, and there were some really wonderful ballads that I got a chance to sing that were done, about sensitivity and about just loving each other and things like that, which men in general still have difficulty expressing, to a large extent. But Gordon has always been a guy who, as well as Bob and other characters on the show, but could relate to those kinds of feelings and issues.
Are there any rules for playing Gordon?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's good to show that there are, because we want to convey a sense of reality and truth to some extent. It's okay for Gordon to become angry, to become upset, but only to a certain limit. I mean, for Gordon to really become, just totally really lose it and become, although it could be funny, unless it's really being made into kind of a funny thing, but to really become, and I guess it's true with any of the characters on Sesame Street, for any of us to cross that line where we become, questionable in character, as far as, our intentions, I mean, we really have to personify the best in people, I think, in terms of how we relate to each other, and especially how we relate to the kids, that we really do, take the time to listen to them and to help them solve whatever problems they have. Yeah, I think I've learned some things, from Gordon, by playing Gordon. As the father of 4 children, I really was able to use a lot of, what I was called upon to do as this father figure on the show in my own, life at home with my own kids. And of course, my own kids have all had the luxury of, getting to know the behind the scenes, aspect of Sesame Street. They've all been on the show. And of course, my son was a regular on the show for a number of years, and that helped to establish some of who he is, just having had that experience.
And do you get feedback from parents talking about your parenting skills on the show?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's part of what our role is, on the show, and the writers are always aware of us as those parental figures, and how we represent, for the parents who are watching, role models as well, but yeah, parents relate to us in that way. I think
Can you stop camera? What about Gordon's relationship with Susan?
Well, Susan and Gordon represent another milestone in television, because they actually preceded the Huxtables on the Cosby Show, and as a married couple, an African American couple that were stable, that had been married for some time. Obviously, they had a loving relationship that was based upon an equality of stature. I mean, there was no. It's not like father knows best. I mean, Susan was an equal partner to Gordon always, and Loretta Long, who plays Susan, really brings a background of as a teacher and a performer. She's actually been a school teacher as well as a doctor of education. She has a doctorate, and she has a real formidable persona of her own that she brings to this character. So she's not just a typical housewife, but I think the main thing is to show that the fact that there is this stable, loving, partnership that has, endured, and for kids to grow up and see that, that image has really, I believe, had an impact, on, especially in a culture, in a time where a lot of kids don't have that imagery at home, that they come from broken homes, or they come from situations where there's just one parent, and then once we became parents on the show by introducing Miles, it just, it emphasized it even more, that we were equal partners as parents, so yeah, it's been really a privilege to be a part of that kind of imagery.
What do you think have been your most important storylines?
Well, everyone mentions, of course, the show we did about Mr. Hooper, when he died, and that of course was a great milestone for us and a great accomplishment to have successfully explored the issue of death, for young children in a way that was sensitive and yet informative and didn't flinch from the issue of when Big Bird asks well, where's Mr. Hooper, and we try to explain to him in the most emotional way without having to overplay it, because we were really feeling the loss ourselves. I mean, Will Lee had the actor who was so dear to us had just recently died, so that the expression of that to Big Bird in a way that was comforting to him became very educational and comforting to the kids and the entire family, who may have been watching. It was aired originally on Thanksgiving Day that year so that families could be together and watch the show. The adoption of Miles, obviously for me, was personally, quite a privilege to be a part of that, to really highlight that whole issue of adoption, and how important it is, and how for those adopted children to see the image of an adopted child who is loved, and to understand that parents who adopt children do it consciously and with love, and of course it created a few questions in my son's mind. I probably early on, he said, "Am I really adopted or not?" I don't think he ever really thought that, but I think for the show to be able to do that in a way that really honored that whole tradition of adoption, was really important. Yeah.
Any other favorite storylines?
Let's see. The storylines.
Or even favorite bits, favorite moments for you?
Well, in the old days of Sesame Street, in the previous years, we used to do a lot more of the little vignettes, and I kind of, just as a performer, who I still like to do comic stuff, and I like to express that sense of humor, and we used to do really funny little vignettes, not as our own characters, but we would become whatever, you know, like, and it was easy for me because you could just put a wig on me and I became a different person, right, and a pair of glasses, and no one would even recognize Gordon. So, I mean, I just did countless scenes, you know, as a variety of funny characters in those days, newscasters and whatever the scene demanded, you know. Kind of in the same way that you know, because we were contemporaries of, and were created around the same time as Saturday Night Live. So there was a lot of that same kind of performing style that was brought to those vignettes in those days as was being done with Saturday Night Live, except it was for kids, you know, but it's very similar. And it's interesting because we over the years have had several of the people from that show, especially the earlier cast members, appear on our show with us.
Who have been some of your favorite guests over the years?
Well, I mentioned Lily Tomlin and Glenn Close, Whoopi Goldberg, Robin Williams. Among the musical guests, though, we've had people like, of course, Ray Charles, who, you know, recently passed, who I have a special kind of, you know, memory of, because the first time he appeared in the show was a day that none of the human cast were scheduled to be on the show with him, but I was so thrilled that he was going to be there that, of course, I came, and I brought my then 2.5-year-old daughter, the one who's now 29, with me, right? So we're kind of hanging around and watching Ray Charles, you know, do his thing, and one of the songs he was about to do was the alphabet song, and so John Stone says, "Hey, Roscoe, why don't you let your daughter go up there and sing the alphabet song with Ray Charles?" So that was, you know, my oldest daughter, Rashida's debut on Sesame Street, you know, sitting around with the other kids singing the alphabet with Ray Charles. But, you know, he was just an amazing person and musical genius, obviously. Also, just the thrill of because I grew up as a big movie fan, as I said before, but to work with, you know, people like Jose Ferrer, who was always one of my favorite actors, especially as a kid. I remember seeing a movie called, he did many movies, but one called Moulin Rouge, where he played Toulouse-Lautrec. And I remember, I guess, reading somewhere at that time, or finding out later, that he played that role, because Toulouse-Lautrec was like a dwarf, you know, and he played that role on his knees with the shoes, you know, coming out from under his knees, and he walked around, and that's how he performed that whole movie, like on his knees, and like, you know, he became like an acting hero of mine because of that, you know, the fact that he could do that. Yeah.
Stop here to change the tape.